very warm welcome to all of you to this Fellow Seminar Series, which we have hold across our offices in Bombay, Delhi, Calcutta, Washington, and Abu Dhabi to discuss important papers that our scholars come out with. ORF is today among the world's largest think tanks. We are ranked 8th ex-US. We are ranked number 2 in Asia as per the 2020 University of Pennsylvania Think Tank Index. And I think ORF conducts very important research into subjects like geopolitics, geoeconomics, climate, education, health, emerging technologies, international relations. In fact, our international relations team, our international relations faculty is perhaps the best, even ahead of any university international relations faculty in the country today. ORF does a lot of convenings. We do convenings in around 40 countries around the world. We do around 1,000 convenings, small and large, across 40 countries, because discussion of scholarly matters is one important thing, but cascading this into the policy domain, into the public domain is also very, very important thing. Therefore, these convenings play a very, very important role. So the largest convening would be the Raisina Dialogue, which is held in Delhi. Raisina Dialogue has now become the world's largest convening on geopolitics and geoeconomics. In the latest dialogue that happened last month, we had 4,000 delegates from 131 countries, including close to 70 ministerial level delegations, always inaugurated by the Indian Prime Minister and a visiting head of state. Always two heads of state. This year it was the Prime Minister of New Zealand. So every time. Raisina is also an important platform where India's ambitions and India's aspirations are projected on the global stage. So Raisina now is also held in Tokyo. It's held in Mexico City. It's held in Abu Dhabi. It's held in 6 different locations. Where, for example, Google launched a Japan Technology Initiative at the Raisina in Tokyo. And so it's also become an important part of India's global aspiration and the way we see ourselves globally. ORF, of course, runs the Raisina Forum for the Future of Diplomacy, where we get young diplomats who've put in between 5 to 10 years of service in their respective foreign services, and we get them for training and immersion of India. Because as we look at Viksit Bharat by 2047, we will be the world's largest economy by that time. That's our ambition, that's our hunger, that's our aspiration, that's our hope. And at that point in time, we need a global franchise of leaders who stand by us, right, who understand us, and to create that global franchise. So this is an exercise in that. Close to 50 countries have sent their young diplomats for this program, and the diplomats are nominated by the respective governments, friendly governments. So that's the condition. And of course, we run the AFGG, the Asian Forum for the the AFGG program for young scholars, is a Future of Governance program, and we have close to 3,000 alumni spread across the world. For example, the foreign minister of Uruguay, the gentleman who was just there, was an alumni. So we have created a global faculty as young leaders under 30 is part of the AFGE program. Just like Raisina, we also do other programs like the Budapest Dialogue in Budapest, the Cape Town Conversation in South Africa, the Yerevan Dialogue in Armenia. But important conversations around development, conversations and conversations in Nairobi, we were doing in Rwanda, conversations where development has to happen in those places. Conversations not in New York, Tokyo, no New York or London or Paris, but conversation in places where development has to happen. Local solutions, global solutions, local problems, locally applied. We also run the largest youth in policy program called the ORF Spark, where we reach out to schools and colleges. Over the last 2 years, we have reached out to 27,000 young people. With conversations to schools and colleges. 27,000 young people across the country have been part of this initiative, and this is the largest youth in policy initiative in the country today. Recently, we even go to small towns like Baroda, for example, or like we had 1,000 students in Baroda debating last month what is their vision of India, what is the kind of India that they want, what is the kind of India that they aspire for. So this feedback goes to the government, this feedback goes to Raisina Dialogue and other places, where and this feedback architects those dialogues. These feedback architects our responses. Out of the Bombay office, we have, of course, in India, we have offices in Bombay, Delhi, and Calcutta. And out of the Bombay office, we work on a few, we have scholars in a few sectors, urban studies, of course, being one of them. Apart from urban studies, we have in cybersecurity, we have counterterrorism, Kashmir and Central Asia, economic issues, trade regulations, emerging technology, space, connectivity, and law. So these are all our scholars in Bombay also work on these issues. So I think I hope I have covered everything more or less. Quick fire. But thank you. That's all from me. Dhaval, over to you.
Right. So, Dr. Desai, over to you.
Let me begin first by thanking ORF Mumbai for inviting me to this very significant seminar on heritage and the scope that we have for digitalization. So Dhaval and Yookta have written this paper, which is a longish paper. It's what we call an occasional paper. This paper was written some time back, and it has been widely read and appreciated. So we thought we will have this seminar and invite young scholars as well as those who have worked in this field to make their observations, and we could then have a dialogue on this subject. So thanks, Dhaval and Yookta, for putting this together. My association with heritage is about a decade old, and it's more administrative rather than academic. I headed the Mumbai Heritage Conservation Committee as its chairman. It's not a very pleasant kind of committee because
Important committee.
I don't know, anything that tells you no becomes an important committee. So the job that the Heritage Committee does, sometimes it does significantly important jobs, basically in guiding architects on how to do the conservation work. And if there are areas missed, then they point out that this could have been done this way better. So it would be good if you modify the presentation that you have made and make those changes on your maps and in your plan. But essentially, the job of the Heritage Committee is to say that heritage must be preserved in the manner in which it was, as far as possible and for as long as possible. And therefore, any deviance from what was already existing is not something which is liked, and it's frowned upon, which makes life difficult for many people who own those heritage structures. I must admit that. But then the job of the Heritage Committee also ought to be done. And therefore, in preservation, this is something that ordinarily happens in other fields as well. I was suggested that as a moderator of this program, this seminar, instead of doing too much of moderation, which I've already done for 10 years, it would be good if I make my own comments to begin with and then hand it over to the authors of The Architect. So I have therefore, after my dialogue with Dhaval yesterday, I prepared a small presentation. It's basically on concentrating more on city heritage because that's where my association was. And the idea is to share with all of you, since all of you are interested in the area of heritage, my experiences over the last decade as to how heritage gets handled, what are the things that get involved in city heritage, what do I think about how city heritage is moving. So I have the opportunity now, since I have demitted office in the Heritage Committee, to be a little more frank on what needs to happen. So I can promise you whatever I would say is something which I observed and what I felt, and I would like to share that with you. Now, I don't need to go through some of these things which are known everywhere, and all of you are aware of this. But to set the context right, every time we speak on heritage, and especially the points that I'm proposing to make, uh, I need to put this into that context. So, India is an ancient and living civilization. It's enormously rich in heritage, and this is recognized the world over. The heritage diversity, both in volume as well as the kinds of heritage that we have, is enormous. And it is natural because we have been an old civilization. Several streams of cultures have come in. They brought their own geniuses into the country, and therefore uh, the country has assimilated all that and is now visible in the culture that we possess in this country. Uh, as you know, heritage is broadly divided into tangible heritage and intangible heritage. Tangible heritage gets a lot of attention. It's the more stressed feature of heritage that you see the world over. So you have archaeological sites, monuments, landscapes, and artifacts, and you have an intangible heritage: languages, music, festivals, dance, social practices, customs. So preserving intangible heritage actually is quite difficult, and you must work very hard on that to go into these areas. And I'm afraid that not much, but some of it we have lost because we have not paid attention. Because the volume was large, the variety was large, and therefore, over a period of time, the neglect of intangible heritage has had its consequences. If one were to put it in a very brief sentence, it's multi-millennial in age, oceanic in volume, and rainbow-like in variety. This is how we could summarize Indian heritage. Thanks. Since the Constitution is a document that we have to adhere to in all areas, so I just wanted to put this up for our young scholars, that it firstly casts a responsibility on the state that it must protect heritage. And Article 49 is very explicit. It says it shall be the obligation of the state to protect every monument or place or object of artistic or historic interest declared by or under law made by Parliament to be of national importance. Uh, I would request all of you to see these three words or four words in specific light. It says to be of national importance. So the Constitution is talking about structures and heritage that could qualify as the ones which have national importance, from spoliation, disfigurement, destruction, removal, disposal, or export, as the case may be. Next. Article 51A just does not only leave it to the state to protect heritage, it casts that responsibility on every citizen of the country. It says, it shall be the duty of every citizen of India to value and preserve the rich heritage of our composite culture, and to protect and improve the natural environment, including forests, lakes, rivers, and wildlife, and to have compassion for living creatures. So, the compassion that this country shows to living creatures comes from that. Now, obviously, if the Constitution says this, then there must be laws to.
Not justiciable.
They should become justiciable.
Yeah.
So there is a law, and this law has evolved over a large period of time. I'm not going into its history, but only as it exists today. So we have the Ancient Monuments and Archaeological Sites and Remains Act for the preservation of heritage and state heritage laws. So this is the national act, but every state has, since it's also the responsibility of state governments, every state has enacted its own heritage laws. There's some customization in these laws, but more or less they follow the footsteps that have been laid out by the Central Act. Now, we have a hierarchy, I mean, this hierarchy has not been pointed out anywhere, but it is worked out into this hierarchy as it has been operationalized. So we have nationally protected monuments. These number about 3,650, and they are looked after by the Archaeological Survey of India, which works under the Ministry of Culture. And in the area of archaeology, this is the apex organization in the country. Then you have state laws, and every time you pass a law, one consequence of it is that you have to have a bureaucracy to implement it. So you can't have a law without a bureaucracy to implement that law. So the state has the state archaeology directorates that protect the state monuments. And if you add up the national and the state monuments, they're about 10,000, and they are the most significant pieces of heritage sites that we have in this country. Now, while this was there, I think in the 90s, for the first time, the cities thought also of adding those that were neither in the two lists, and therefore they found that there were other pieces of architecture that were very good and they should be protected. So Mumbai was the first city that had its own heritage list. It prepared a city heritage list. But since it's not one of its main obligatory functions, obviously it needed the support of the state. So the city lists are always prepared with the approval of the state governments. So we have this city heritage list prepared with the state approval for the conservation of local heritage. And these local heritage structures then are based on the archaeological and heritage quality and architectural quality get graded into different kinds of levels. So you have grade 1, which needs to be preserved very well. Then you have grade 2 and you have grade C. So most of the cities that have done city heritage lists follow this precedent that has been set by Mumbai, and all of them more or less have these three lists grading their heritage structures. And my talk is going to be mainly focused on city heritage lists. City heritage lists, many of them are large. When I mean large, it means that some of these lists are about 1,000, 1,200. Mumbai has about 1,000 in I think in 2000 and around 2011, 12, there was a subsidiary list that was also prepared, and that further added a number of structures. There were lots of complaints on that and how it was put together. So the committee, the state government appointed another review committee, and the review committee then truncated that list and brought it down to a few hundred, but they have got added to the main list. So we have about 1,500, heritage sites and structures in the Mumbai list. There are a number of forces at play as to what should be put into the heritage list. In a city, I experienced that there are people who want to get out of it, and there are people who want to get into it. I'll give you an example, for instance. Suppose there is an old structure and it's rented out, so there are tenants. And if there is a quarrel between the landlord and the tenant, then the tenants will petition the heritage committee that this is a wonderful structure, somehow it has been missed out and it should be put into the heritage lists because it protects their interests, so they are interested in getting into the heritage list. And the landlord, of course, will say that it has nothing of that kind. It is just an ordinary structure, and this is what the tenants are trying. So they will try to see that it does not get included in the heritage list. There would be political groups who would say that it's loaded in favor of one kind of structure and therefore other structures should also be brought in. So all kinds of combinations of forces work in getting this list done. I don't know how many conservation architects are here, but if there are, uh, conservation architects play a very big role because they want structures to remain. They resist any, truncation of the list and would like more to be added. So each one has its own self-interest or her self-interest, and that shapes a part of the list that gets prepared. Not to say that there are some that get into the list which are extremely important. Like in the Mumbai list, you would have the Chhatrapati Shivaji Terminus as one of them, or Mumbai Municipal Corporation building itself, which is a wonderful building that has been built. So there are these structures that stand out anyway. Old Ajanta caves or Gateway of India, these are extremely important. So they fall into that category anyway. But what I'm talking about is more in grade 2 and generally in grade 3. Now, these raise questions of variety, selection, volume, and finance, and reconciling heritage conservation with future development, amongst others. This is an important statement. The selection process in city heritage lists are not very rigorous. What is the basis on which you have put these into the list is something, if you go into the details of it, you find that it has not been vigorously tested out. So there has been some ad hocism. I remember that the last list that was prepared by young students who went around, because you need energy to go around the whole city looking for heritage sites. They prepared a largish list, which was then gone into by a more expert committee, and then they decided that this would be the list. So, and it did not go with certain criteria that you will have this kind of criteria, a group of criteria that will select these structures into the list. So the question also which arises with cities is that just having a list is not material. If you have put something into the list from the point of view of heritage, then that heritage has to be preserved. Now, if you have to preserve something, you need money to preserve, and you need good money to preserve structures that are old. So the financial aspect of it also does not always get considered while the lists are prepared. The other fact about all our large cities is that there has to be scope for development, because the city does not remain static, it is dynamic, things change, and therefore you need new structures. Some structures have to fall, new ones have to be built. New ones that would be built are new structures in the sense that they have imbibed new technology, etc., new building styles, and therefore change is something which is constantly there. So if there is too much of restriction on development because of this, then there are two forces at work in the city. One which is trying to protect, and the other, which is a very strong force, is trying to destroy. And this quarrel is happening in all the cities, and the battle seems to be, not really decisively, but quite forcibly being won by those who would go in favor of development. So, and one of the reasons of this is because if you have so much on your plate and you can't do anything about it, then your case gets weakened. कि आपने सब कुछ डाल दिया उसमें और कुछ कर भी नहीं रहे हो. So this is the kind of argument which one gets to hear. So the burden of preserving such heritage becomes enormous. One of the things that I noticed was that this question, as I raised, how much of heritage should be preserved, irrespective of whether it can be protected or not. I'm not going into that question right now, but how much of, for a country that has so much heritage, how much of heritage one would preserve? Now, heritage has ages. There are different kinds of heritages. If you go into architecture, then there are different kinds of architecture. Mumbai has mostly Art Deco. Now, how much of Art Deco should be preserved? 10 examples, 12 examples, 100 examples, 1,000 examples. This has to be decided. So the general opinion, even among architect and heritage people, is that if you have a particular kind of architecture in which there are features that are exclusive to those buildings, then they ought to be preserved. But if they are mere replicas of the same thing, then you don't need to preserve many replicas, because the idea is to carry a particular kind of architectural feature for reference in the future. So that is something that needs to determine how heritage should be listed. The heritage piece must have extraordinary significance in some way. Beauty, pride, architecture, potential in terms of tourism, that ought to be factored in. So this quarrel also many times happens as to how much, for instance, of imperial architecture do you want to preserve. So do you want to constantly recall that you were a civilization that was, this is a very potent question these days that get raised. So that is something which has to be factored. I mean, whether you agree with it or not, one has to remember that yes, that is a feature. This is a question that does not get asked in other countries because they've had not that kind of an experience. But in a country like ours, it does rise. So then in most heritage lists, there is an overwhelming emphasis on built heritage. So if I say there are 1,000 structures or sites in the list of Mumbai, there would be not more than, say, 3 to 4% of sites that would take natural and other kinds of heritage sites into consideration. They are mostly architectural, they are built. So the built architecture gets a lot of focus in heritage. UNESCO itself divides its selection into cultural, natural, and mixed sites. So if you look at the heritage list, then you will find a lot of natural sites that have been included, forests, beautiful areas that need to be preserved. So and architecture. So there is a balance that has been kept by UNESCO in this. In most of our city heritage lists, that balance does not appear to figure. Next. Then in architecture, there is a propensity to push into city listing a very large number of similar pieces. I mentioned this. Actually, only the best examples need to be preserved. An identical view needs to be taken in regards to precincts. In Mumbai, we also have a number of precincts, and we were looking at rules that we were to frame. Government asked us to frame rules for each of the precincts. And we found that one set of precincts were quite similar to other sets of precincts in numbers. There were some precincts that were exclusive. For instance, if you take the other Parsi colony in Mumbai, it's an exclusive kind of a precinct. Or if you take Fort or Marine Drive precinct, these are very important precincts and they need to be fully protected. But if you're again going to multiply precincts essentially means that there is an architectural kind of appearance to an entire area. So Fort, for instance, is a precinct and there are hundreds of structures there. In that precinct, there might be some structures that have no architectural value, but as a precinct, their height, etc., are of the same kind, and therefore you would like to preserve what is already built there as far as possible in that shape. So that's something that I noticed, that there are too many precincts that cities put into heritage. So one has to be selective rather than go for mass preservation. And the last point I would like to make is public listing of private properties as heritage. Somehow this has stood the test of court scrutiny. But if you come to think of it, it's in one way a huge disservice to those who have these properties. They're excellent properties. I mean, they would be worth 100 crores, 200 crores, but since they have to be preserved in the shape that they are, living in them is extremely difficult. I have gone to some of them and they are not modern structures. So there are things that need to be changed in those. Sometimes they need to be pulled down. But the basic fact is you have put his structure into the list, but you have not compensated him because you only give him heritage TDR. And just for the sake of your pleasure of seeing heritage, you are crucifying all these people because you cannot change them and you are not in a position to fund them for their preservation. Uh, I think one needs to have a second look at it because then many of them would then do disservice to heritage, and the simple way is to let the structure degenerate as far as possible. Don't repair it, let it seed, and it will fall on its own. So I basically feel for a country which has so much of heritage, why do you have to get into structures of this kind? I'm sure those who list it, if their houses were put into that list, they would revolt. So I think public listing of private properties, if you're not able to compensate them, is not something which is fair and just. So you will be listing without reference to finances and administrative machinery for preservation. This is bothering all the cities. It neither has the administrative mechanism nor the financial mechanism to protect them. They are fragile in resources. Heritage TDR does not satisfy the requirements, and therefore there is huge gap in municipal capacity and understanding of heritage. The capacity also to accept for a few people who understand heritage in the city administrative machinery, the heritage wing. You have to rely on ward officers, etc., to look about. So if something is happening, someone has pulled down a heritage site, you don't know about it. Someone reports it, then someone goes and sees it, and then an investigation starts. Thank you. So these are some of the things that I noticed, and there are important people who work in heritage in this city who are here, and therefore they should be able to take this, debate it and take it forward. Thanks for
Thank you.
the time.
Thank you, sir,
I've taken
for a
little
very
more
well
time.
detailed presentation. But now I think, Aishwarya
Yeah.
Kipnis, she's quite a well-known architect from Delhi who has joined us, and she has some time constraint and has to leave at around 4. So if we can maybe invite her to give her presentation, and then we'll go into the paper.
Aishwarya,
Thank you so much.
welcome.
Can you
Please
hear
go
me?
ahead.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this invitation and such an interesting topic about digital heritage. And I read through your paper, and I think there's so much to be said, and there's also so much that needs to be done in this particular sector. So, although I'm not an expert of digital heritage, but I have some experience of working with digital heritage through some of the projects I have done. And what I'm going to talk about is essentially learnings that I had from working with grassroots project on digital heritage. So my first experience of working with, cataloging online heritage and putting together an online archiving, which felt like a great idea at that time. But 10 years later, I think the one thing we really need to be mindful of when we talk about digital heritage is the life of that heritage, because technology changes really, really fast, and stuff that we spent a lot of energy on making about 10 years ago is totally redundant, both in terms of code and both in terms of its sort of usage. So the idea of an online repository, is it just to become a library, or do you want it to be something that is more interactive? And there are so many challenges when you try to make it interactive, because you have a lot of people who don't want to see the right things, or they just want to create havoc? How do you use technology to monitor that? And when you start monitoring, then what role are you really playing, and how much is it actually participatory? So in my experience of having worked with different digital technologies, I think the one question we really need to ask about digital heritage in the Indian context is of digital parity. Um, a lot of things seem really good on paper, but when we start to put it out there, there is an initial sort of wave of excitement. Everybody's excited about the project, but after a few months, it sort of just dies out. It gets lost in darkness because it doesn't engage with people anymore. One of the sort of real sort of challenges I felt was the capacity building of general people in how do you deal with a digital archive. We worked on a project called the Restoration Toolbox, where we tried to build a participatory platform where different people could come together and work collaboratively towards restoring buildings of everyday heritage. But unfortunately, I think we tried to use a sort of a code which was open source, and that's something that really didn't fit well. We tried very hard that different kinds of municipalities or different kinds of government agencies would adopt the website or take it on. But the one thing we found was the concept of code. Who does it belong to, and how does open source actually work in our context? And I think the ethics and the engagement of this kind of heritage is something we really struggle with. So when we're talking about digitizing, are we just talking about making an online repository, an online library, or are we actually thinking about how digital technologies can make a difference in bringing heritage together and bringing citizens together to do something about their heritage? Because I think we are a very, very long way from that. And I think this paper is really a good starting point because there is a lot of dialogue that actually needs to be had. And how does digital technology genuinely make an impact on people's lives and on people's everyday productivity? And I think that's something that we really need to make. When you have big corporations, when you have big institutions, yes, it makes sense. But can it make sense at the smallest level? Can it make sense in the smallest molecule? Can regular citizens use digital technology to preserve their heritage? And that is the question I'd like to ask.
Thank you very much, Aishwarya. I hope you will continue to be there so that you could interact with some of the points that are raised in this meeting. Thank you. Dhaval and Yookta will take over.
So thank you, Dr. Jha, for shedding light on the real-world challenges to physical heritage conservation, especially in cities. And thank you also, Aishwarya, for sharing your experiences about, the challenges that you encountered and the pros and cons of technology. And so what, your very profound presentation and Aishwarya's remarks have, in a sense, created kind of a launch pad for Yookta and me to explain the salient features of our research, which deal with the increasingly critical role of digitalization in heritage conservation, which may not address, which may not be a panacea for all the challenges and to overcome them, but which will, in a sense, make a significant difference to the approach to heritage conservation, at least the way we have been traditionally pursuing it. So India's cities are rising fast, skylines are shooting higher, flyovers slicing through the city landscape, and master plans redrawing. And so who better to understand this more than you? Redrawing the past with just a pen of a stroke, with a stroke of a pen. So in this relentless march towards modernity, something sacred is somehow being lost. So shrines are swallowed by shopping malls, stepwells are forgotten beneath parking lots, and oral histories are silenced under the noise of traffic. So in this moment of cultural erasure that we see around us, Yookta and I have tried to come out or tried to ask rather a very pertinent question, that can we still save what makes us who we are? And in that sense, how best we can preserve our past. So this paper is what we've tried to come up with an answer to those questions. It's a passionate argument for why digitalization must be more than a tool. It must be a lifeline, and not tomorrow but today. And across India's rapidly urbanizing terrain, heritage is being squeezed, physically displaced, institutionally neglected, and spiritually sidelined. But digital technologies offer a rare and precious opportunity to maybe preserve that trend. We believe that 3D scanning, GIS mapping, AR and VR in terms of augmented and virtual reality, and immersive digital storytelling are not cold technical instruments, but vessels of memory and meaning. They hold the promise of making heritage visible again, not just as relics behind velvet ropes, but as living, breathing experiences woven into the very fabric of modern life. Our research traces the complex challenges confronting India's conservation efforts: overlapping bureaucracies, chronic underfunding, and a failure to engage local communities as rightful and empowered inheritors of their histories. And we also contrast this with some inspiring global paradigms, like how China's powerful centralized heritage databases are conserving their heritage, like how Europe's participatory governance models have worked for them, and the bold use of immersive tech in cities that refuse to choose between the old and the new. So in these places, heritage is not sacrificed to development; it has evolved alongside it. So sadly, in India, digital efforts, especially digital efforts, they remain painfully shallow. Too often, they are aimed at beautification for tourists or marketing brochures, slick surfaces that conceal a deeper, more dangerous neglect. Uh, we call for a complete reframing in this paper, from heritage as a spectacle to heritage as soul, from commodification to communion. We need digital infrastructure that does not merely display the past but dignifies and venerates it. A complete heritage conservation ecosystem that blends physical and digital preservation techniques to give the ownership back to communities, provide open access to all, and ensure that our histories deserve both preservation and pride. Yet, digitalization is not without its own shadows. It demands reliable infrastructure, constant maintenance, and an ethical compass to prevent virtualization from replacing the physical experience. But these are not the reasons for hesitation. They are calls for courage and a call to action. Because when done right, digitalization can also do something profound. It can equalize and it can heal. It can create a shared experience where the memory of a city's past becomes the inheritance of all its people, and not just a privileged few. In a world hurtling forward, heritage offers our anchor, and digitalization, if wielded with care and conscience, can be the thread that binds our future to the wisdom and wonder of our past. In that sense, this is not just maybe if I can say it's not a research paper, it's more of a plea to policymakers, to planners, to every citizen who has ever stood before a crumbling Haveli or a fading mural and felt something deep stir within. And now is the time to act. Let us not wait for silence to fall before we begin to listen. Let us digitalize not to forget, but to remember. To preserve not just our monuments, but our meaning and our being, and exist an essential counterbalance to the relentless churn of urban onslaught, and an inevitable necessity to safeguard the future of our past. I leave it at that, and I'll ask Yookta to come in and run us through the presentation that explains our paper. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dhaval sir. Thank you, Dr. Jha, and thank you, Aishwarya ma'am, for your comments. I think we'll get back to the limitations around digitalizing heritage after I've gone through the paper, because there are many, and I think a lot of which will come through your experiences working in the field. But first off, I would like to acknowledge how cool it is to be surrounded by people who care so much about the human experience. I believe heritage is fundamentally just that. Objects and places are not important because of the meanings, and not important just because of their existence, but because of the meanings and the uses that people attach to them and the values they represent. Conservation is not just about freezing a moment in perpetuity, but adjusting and readapting spaces to the needs of people around them. This presentation will explore the evolving meanings of heritage, the rise of digital preservation norms, how digital tools are reshaping conservation practices, and introduces the concept of the heritage industrial complex and examines India's frameworks, challenges, case studies while drawing insights from global examples to highlight the transformative role of technology in heritage conservation. I think Dr. Jha covered what heritage is, how it can be classified into these categories. So I will not go into that too much detail. But this paper primarily addresses built heritage, like Dr. Shah said, because built heritage is given more focus in the conservation space generally. So we have more examples in abundance of those cases. So coming to why prioritizing heritage, heritage tours and storytelling isn't just a nice extra on travel itineraries. They are central drivers of global tourism revenue. Countries are tapping into indigenous cultures to project identity and influence, a trend amplified by rising populism and a nostalgic pull towards idealized past. These emotional connections now leave permanent digital footprints, making digital conservation not just a cultural need, but a political and diplomatic tool. According to KPMG's 2024 report, the global heritage tourism market hit $587 billion last year and is projected to reach over $813 billion by 2032. South Asia contributed the largest share of foreign tourist arrivals, and among the top 10 source markets were Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Nepal. In India, post-pandemic recovery is gaining pace, and ASI managed site revenues are steadily climbing back to pre-COVID levels, as is shown in this graph. We have over 30,000 heritage sites in urban centers alone, which hold immense soft power potential through our ancient civilization. The Indian government aims to attract 100 million international tourists annually by 2047. This is one of Viksit Bharat's goals. And achieving this goal requires innovative urban heritage planning and infrastructure development in Indian cities. So let's talk a little bit more about the evolution of heritage itself as a word, and this comes through heritage as a concept came through around the French Revolution, when heritage evolved from monarchical property to a public good and became integral to the nationalization process. There was a heritage boom that followed the Second World War, which was driven by increased middle class insecurity, with nostalgia fueling the development of mass tourism and the commercialization of the past. The foundational documents which led to heritage frameworks, heritage conservation frameworks coming into being and ratified by multiple countries were the Venice Charter of 1964, which initially limited heritage to monuments and archaeological sites. The scope was broadened in the late 20th century through the Protection of World Cultural and Natural Heritage Convention of 1972, the Declaration of Amsterdam of 1975, and the later Convention on the Value of Cultural Heritage for Society, or the Faro Convention as it is known, which happened in 2005 and came into force in 2011. Today, over 40 such international and regional accords exist, and heritage now includes buildings, gardens, urban and rural precincts, natural sites, and intangible cultural practices. Coming to digital preservation and heritage conservation, these norms were introduced starting 1996 with the World Intellectual Property Organization defining digital preservation as a set of tools and management activities that ensure continuous access to digital materials, and was re-emphasized in UNESCO's Charter on Preserving Digital Heritage, as well as the Convention on Value of Cultural Heritage for Society, Faro Convention again. There are three primary stages of this conservation digitally that happens. The first is documentation, which is the most crucial. The second is network sharing or research, which means reducing barriers to accessing information. And the third is content interaction or presentation, which is something that Dhaval sir also talked about in terms of, for example, introducing measures like AR or VR for tourists to come in and interact with the site in creative ways. There are three types of applications for these digital tools in heritage conservation. The first being disaster prevention and conservation planning, in which satellite imagery, GIS, BIM, also known as HBIM, which we will come to later, are used. The second is AR or VR storytelling. And the third, perhaps the most important in our case, is data management and collection systems. Coming to something I drew an inspiration from because I have an international relations background. This is the military-industrial complex. So in his 1961 farewell address, President Dwight D. Eisenhower famously warned that the Cold War defense expansion had created a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions and cautioned that we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. This concept uses something called an iron triangle, which depicts a three-way coalition of the armed forces, the Congress, and defense contractors. His warning has since been interpreted as a critique of how permanent defense establishment could exert undue political and economic power. The idea is this three-pronged coalition ensures that power and influence remain in a specific or between a specific group. Drawing from this, we talk about something called the heritage industrial complex. This has three primary coalitions between government bodies, private companies, and professional academics. The idea behind introducing this as a concept in our paper was that the public or population, this includes local communities as well as other tourists or people who are interacting with the site, become stakeholders only through consumption and not through contribution in terms of what their needs are, whether they are being addressed in conservation activity around the site, and what they expect out of this conservation activity, whether their say actually goes into the selection of property getting onto a list, and so on. Digital tools can empower these communities by diversifying storytelling, opening up information access to a larger public, and make this iron triangle more porous to other stakeholders. The stakeholder matrix has therefore expanded with increasing virtual spaces on digital cultural heritage. And local communities can play a key role in defining and facilitating this interaction. Tourists are also increasingly contributing to shaping heritage through their experiences. The cyberspace dimension has expanded public spectatorship beyond geographical territory. And we'll come back to some examples and address limitations of this later. Again, Dr. Jha went over what these bodies look like. This is not necessarily entirely in a hierarchical order, but the central apex body is the Archaeological Survey of India, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs.
Skip through this because Dr. Jha has already explained it quite well.
And a lot of
interest of time, because
Sure. And these are three
there cannot
main,
be any repetition.
Three main NGOs that have a lot of them have taken up public-private partnerships and have been stakeholders in the same. Our Aga Khan Trust for Culture, which is case studies of which we'll be discussing later. Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, or INTAC, and International Council on Monuments and Sites. This is an important slide because last year's budget showed a substantial rise in allocations for tourism infrastructure, while funding for central schemes supporting libraries, museums, archives, and performing arts academies has stagnated or declined over the past 3 years. This decline affects allocations for central sector schemes and autonomous bodies. And India's heritage runs the risk of being entirely reliant on its commercial or tourist potential, rather than there being a supportive mechanism or a supportive hand of the center to enable these practices to continue on their own. Coming to key challenges that India is facing, there is, like I said, an emphasis on tourist facilities over holistic conservation. We have a very big problem of documentation in India. A majority of the sites that includes perhaps 20,000 urban and a vast majority of rural and tribal areas that have built heritage have not been documented, don't have images that are verified, and databases that exist, like a collaboration with ISRO that was done with the ASI, were also unverified and unvalidated. So, continued focus on tourist centric facility development causes a huge ripple effect. This was visible in one of the first conservation schemes that the center enforced, which was called Hriday, or the Heritage City Development and Augmentation Yojana, between 2015 to 2019. Its aim was to revitalize civic infrastructure around heritage, religious, cultural, and tourism sites in 12 cities. The funding was done as a lump sum dispersal and not phased out. There was a lack of auditing post dispersal as well. A lot of challenges came across in some reports post the conservation period was over, including poor interdepartmental collaboration, conflicting government priorities, lack of due diligence, unrealistic timelines, and frequent cost time overruns. There were a lot of quick fixes that ignored inclusion of local artisans and traditional crafts within the conservation process. There are specific reports of Dwarka and Mathura where this was recorded. The aftermath of Hriday is that it has been subsumed into a scheme called Prashad and Swadesh Bharat, which are focused entirely on religious tourism. They develop a 12-route heritage circuit, and they are essentially geared and selected sites for the same. Other challenges include, like I said, poor documentation, fragmented management, overlapping jurisdictions and mandates, lack of validated digital databases, minimal community involvement and public participation, and lack of innovative funding strategies. Again, projects like Hriday are entirely funded by the center, or 100% funded by the center. There are a few schemes like the Adarsh Smarak and Adopt a Heritage schemes that allow for CSR funding to come in, but the onus is on the state to pick up these costs. Let's talk a little bit about the common tools that are used in digitized heritage conservation. The first is satellite and aerial imagery and photography, which helps with landscape mapping out landscape features in larger scale areas, so regional, continental, and global scales. GIS mapping is something most of us will be familiar with, which is a computer-based technology to map, process images, create statistical analysis, and allows for this data to be used for topographic and geographic features and health monitoring of heritage sites. Photogrammetry, again, is modeling of objects and acquired images to provide geometric detail, surface texture, and is used for external restoration work a lot. Laser scanning is used a lot for digital twins and creating maps. It's something that is also used by your cars now to detect how far or how close another car is to you or another vehicle is to you. And building information modeling, again, is a 3D model based process that gives architecture, engineering, and construction professionals insights and tools to efficiently do their job. And 3D modeling, augmented reality, and virtual reality are tools primarily used to create real environment experiences or stimulations such that it enhances their engagement when it is actually being consumed by an audience. So, coming to disaster prevention and conservation planning, which is one of the use cases of these tools, the key technologies again are BIM, HBIM, 3D modeling, and so on. Their applications are to study erosions, ruins, occupation patterns, and plan transit development and historic urban landscapes. The Urban Studies Department here has done extensive research around transit-oriented development and transport and so on. Footfall is a huge problem when it comes to capacity building and management in these tourist sites, which is something that we need to actively be thinking about as we are planning for 2047. Global examples of using these technologies come from Spain, where they have used a combination of unmanned aerial vehicles and photogrammetry for data collection and structural analysis to document the site's ancient features. In Italy, the masonry towers relied on these technological tools for continuous structural health monitoring. And in Italy's Sassi landscape, again, another very delicate and protected site, also used these tools to create accurate simulations and predict threats posed by high visitor volumes to improve the capacity of priority restoration. Yeah. Just, I think these are great examples. Syria is, as we all know, a conflict zone. There's this company called SciArc, which created 3D panoramic twins of heritage sites in Syria. Japan also has documented and digitally preserved a lot of its heritage and is prone to natural calamities, which is why this is a very useful thing. AR and VR storytelling is another use case for digital tools. Beyond aesthetics, it makes space for the creation of knowledge, memory making, and shared experiences, like Dhaval sir mentioned. And there's a lot of small-scale Indian initiatives that have already taken place, like Jatan, which is a virtual museum builder. There's ASI SciArc, which preserves the Gateway of India, or does a 3D preservation of the Gateway of India. The Rajdhara project of Rajasthan and Gujarat offers virtual tours. Incredible India and Google have partnered up to create virtual walkthroughs of heritage sites. Global inspirations, the Mogao caves of China have been conserved to a great extent using photogrammetry as well as VR and AR to create experiences and gamify the site. If you go on their website, you will be able to actually go through a bunch of the caves sitting at home and wearing your VR glasses. And Rijks Museum, I'm butchering the pronunciation of Netherlands, offers free high-res images, which a lot of users have enabled and downloaded from, and can create their own galleries and experiences within the ambit of the site. So there is scope for archival co-creation. Finally, data management and collection systems, most important for us. The role of documentation is essential for land use planning, ticketing, and site management. and is critical for risk mitigation and conservation planning. If we don't know what we have, we cannot start conserving it. There are a lot of European models we can take as best practices. The Inspire Directive, which enabled Italy's CWeb and England's NHLE to create open map-based searches, databases. Portugal's Atlas also integrated immovable, movable, and intangible heritage into a geo database. And Czech Republic has a geo portal that allows for risk management, legal status, and monument catalogs to be in one place. Remote sensing in fragile zones. These are two databases that have been created for the Middle East and Africa region, which use aerial photography and remote sensing for inaccessible areas and endangered sites. Finally, any way forward would require us to first create a centralized archaeological database. Like I said, we need to know what we are conserving in order to begin the process. And we need to prioritize auditing these schemes when we're taking them up, empower local communities to upskill as well as inherit their surroundings. This is something that is covered in the Lahore example of the AKTC projects. Expanding CSR and public-private partnerships for more innovative funding strategies for these schemes, leveraging AR and VR for accessibility and enhanced user engagement, determining priority and audience for a particular form of heritage before introducing technological interventions. There's no point in, like Aishwarya Tipnis said, that there's no point in introducing these measures because they're going to die out if they're not actually useful. So we need to know who we are introducing these kinds of measures for. For example, creating a database of 5 lakh entries of tangible and intangible heritage is not useful for a common person or a layman who is just trying to engage or play around with a website. So also, finally, finding creative ways to accommodate for conflicting narratives and histories. This is another practice that the museum in Netherlands that I mentioned does, in which they invite dialogues and conflicting narratives to coexist with each other. So that is the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Yookta, for a very detailed and extremely interesting and informative presentation on the digital aspect of heritage. We have a number of experts in this area who are already here, and we would like to hear from them on what are their impressions, what is new that they would like to add, and I think the participants who are here would like to hear from all of them. Yes, Sani.
Okay. Hi, good evening. Just so that everybody, I mean, I don't know if I was introduced earlier, but I'm a conservation architect, and currently I'm a professor at Kamalareja Institute for the master's program in urban conservation. So just to begin with, I think I'll just make the air clear that what conservation is, because there seems to be a lot of debate about this. So conservation is not about going back in time. I know always conservation is pitted against development. That's not the way it is. It's neither freezing a frame. That's not what conservation is about. Conservation is about managing change, right? So we understand that the heritage, which we associate certain value with, and to keep this in context, that value is associated by us in the present. It's not the value that we have inherited. It's the value we associate with the heritage in today's day by the current generation, and that's why we call it heritage, something that we consider important to be passed down to the next generation. It's every generation's point of view or every generation's decision to make what they think is important to them to pass down to the next generation. So I think it's not about that no development should be allowed, right? But something that should be done consciously to ensure that we are talking about something that has been there for generations. I mean, it has lived out its life, all right? So if you say a concrete building say has a life of 50 years. You know how many years you've seen heritage structures around, right? They have lived out their lives. They have been occupied for several generations. They are not frozen in time because they have experienced generations after generations living with them, right? They have changed use, they have changed hands in so many different ways. So I think that heritage is very, very dynamic in nature. Unfortunately, because we associate heritage only with monumentality and not with everyday lives, is where we think that it's probably, something that's big like Taj Mahal and not something like a railway station next to my house or our schools or a municipal hospital that you go to. All of that is also heritage, living, breathing, and actually that is more heritage than just maybe a fort which has kind of lost its use over a period in time. So I think that's very important to understand that what heritage is, why is it important. I'm not going to go much into that because obviously we are talking about digitalization of heritage. And I think it's very important. And what I'm very glad is that this sort of discussion has opened up into a multidisciplinary kind of an idea, right? It's not only the conservationist job to talk about heritage, because then what happens is we are bringing only a perspective. When you have people with different sort of training coming up from different walks of life, right? They bring in all their own perspectives, and that's what makes this dynamic process more engaging. So I was very happy to see that this kind of expansion of bringing in more ideas is there, which is, I think it's very, very necessary. That's of course one. What I think I'm going to, since we were on the last slide, I think the problem essentially with digitalization is largely about politics and policies and ethics, right? Because something like this has to be well thought through. So that it's not misused in many ways. Like any technology gets misused, we know that. So I think that is very important. That on the onset needs to be framed of exactly what digitalization is. How do you digitalize? Because access to data becomes very important, right? Who you're giving access to, how much of access, and all of that. And the second thing I think is very important is capacity building. We are talking about community engagement and all of that, but we are not talking about the caretakers or the managers who are going to, like a professional comes into a project, delivers it, and then leaves. But what about the managers that are there who are supposed to take this forward, right? We expect municipal engineers who have had no training whatsoever in heritage, asking them to manage heritage. I think a capacity building program is very essential in at all levels of government, right? So whether we are talking about the Ministry of Culture, because we are talking about heritage, or the ASI, or the state archaeology, and also the fact that because they are limited, so for a very long time, ASI only employed archaeologists. It's very much in the recent years that they've expanded their staff from just more than archaeologists. The same way goes to the other departments as well. Like sir rightly said, you have a small MHCC department within the municipal corporation. They are all engineers, right? They have not, neither is their degree, nor is their training, which has been given to them over a period of time to deal with heritage. And they work in a heritage building. They're supposed to manage not just theirs, but all the others as well. So I think all of this becomes very crucial when you talk about not just heritage, but also in this case, of course, digitalization of heritage. Another thing I would like to point out is the purpose of or the intended aim, right? So are we looking at it as tools of conservation and management, which is different, or are we looking at it in terms of tools for interpretation, education, and awareness? So I think we cannot, it is quite a vast topic in itself. So it's not so simple. It is complex and layered. And I think we need to kind of bring in all the aspects to be able to understand it. Because if your audience is different, right? So the tools of conservation and management will maybe require a smaller group of professionals, whereas the one of education, interpretation, and awareness will require a larger engagement. So I think that all needs to be kept in mind before we kind of decide, because a lot of things have been done. It's not all dark and gloomy. Things have been done towards digitalization of heritage, towards stakeholder engagement. So a good example would be not, it won't be recent anymore, but in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, 18 or 19, when Mumbai got its World Heritage tag, it was one of the only nomination dossiers in India which was not government driven, right? It was completely stakeholder driven. So all the stakeholders that were, so we were talking about private owners of buildings, the Art Deco buildings, they came together and they are like, we are interested in getting a World Heritage tag, right?
And
so
I'm
all
very
of them,
proud to say that ORF played a very critical
yes,
role
yes,
in
of
putting
course.
that dossier
Yes,
together.
yes, they did.
With Ada.
So
With Abba, of course.
a lot of this come with stakeholder engagement, right? It was something that went from the people to the state, and then the state verified it and sent it forward to UNESCO and all of that. So such positive things do work. Yes,
Absolutely.
to make a larger impact, they need to happen faster and often. I get it, but I think the people that are here in this room, the younger generation, it's up to you guys to kind of understand it and take it forward, get invested in it. And like I said, don't think that it's only a conservationist role. And I'm not even using the word conservation architect for that particular reason, right? So I might have an architecture degree, and that's why I'm called a conservation architect. But I like to identify myself as a conservationist. And I believe that on my team, I would have people of all kinds of discipline working towards this one goal of what we think is heritage. Because like sir rightly said, I loved that use of word where you said multimillennial. And I also saw everybody writing it down on the table. It is true. But and I don't want to get into the debate of like which heritage is important, because to be very honest, I think all of it is. Okay, I know sir said that we don't want too much of heritage, but I don't think there is enough heritage. All right. So, and like I said, it is not stuck in time. So it's not about I cannot use a historic structure in my daily use. That is something that is, we are limited in our understanding of how we can make those historic structures be relevant in today's time as well. Because believe you me, they are designed in beautiful ways for them to be adapted in whatever time and age you want. It is just our limitation, or the limitation of technology that we might have in the present times, that might not allow us to completely explore. And like, also I would like to agree with one more thing sir said, finance and economics is very important. I don't think we stress enough. And the reason why heritage fails is because we are not talking about economics. We have to start with the money, because unfortunately that is what's going to get the argument rolling. So if we look about economics, we start with, you have to talk about numbers. You have to say that this site is going to fund itself. This site will be able to manage itself, right? And it's going to bring in more profit. You have to start talking about such aspects. So economic is also a value that you associate with heritage. It's not just about the history or the architecture or the social value that it brings. I think once we start talking about all of this, we start giving it enough attention rather than just thinking of it. Because what we do in India currently is think of it as an object, as if it's a museum, and the city is a museum or the country is a museum, and it's an object that we need to preserve, and that's all that's going to be there. People will come, take a look at it, read a little bit about it, and that's it. But that's not what heritage is. Heritage is so much more. So I'm really glad that you gave me this opportunity. It was a really nice discussion going on as well within it. And yes, all the tools that you're talking about, they are there. We do some of it within the college as well. So we insist that the students get education. They use all the latest technology, because that's what they need to do to keep it kind of up to date. And also because then that means that we are sharing our knowledge with not just within the country, but all across at international level as well. A lot of research that happens because there is some sort of co-learning, right? All cities might face similar problems in their own context. So it's a good idea if you share a common technology, because then you speak the same language. So I guess it becomes very important for that co-sharing as well.
Brilliant, Sanya. Just one more information for our youngsters. For the volume of heritage that we have, what do you think is the status currently of conservation architects? Do we have enough? Or do we
No.
need more? Are architects going into that direction?
Okay, so the first thing that I ask when students come in for the master's first year is, why did you choose to be do a master's in conservation? And students come up with, oh, I like history and all that sort of thing. The reality is, of course, is it is there a market for something like that?
Right.
There is no shortage of course, the role that a conservationist can play in the society. That's for sure. But what I've found is what we really lack, which I wish would work out, is the political will to a certain extent. Because it is we have tried bringing in society groups to come in and or NGOs to come in and all of that, but really at some point it is where the political will or the state, which really plays a huge role. So that is of course very important, because so the reason why a lot of this heritage or a lot of role that we can play also involves government partaking in this as well. So I think that becomes very important. And if we're going to limit ourselves to just look at conservationists doing restoration, then yes, we can say that there is not much to do, because how much of it you can do. But if you expand the scope of just understanding what heritage and its fields includes, then there is so much more going on that can be done, right? So there is a shortage in the sense we have just 6 university level courses so 6 colleges as such who offer conservation as a mainstream degree, and with that being maybe 20 or 30, that's the kind of numbers that are coming out. And there is so much more. And also because they think that they limit themselves as if only going into a conservation firm to practice. But I would wish that people would go into ASI, would go into State Archaeology Department, go into BMC, because that is where it's going to matter. They are the ones who are going to bring about the change, because that is what is more important. So those kind of roles also need to be filled in, because it's not that just because I have a degree, I can work with heritage. I think it's merely the sensitivity to intervene in a historic environment. That's all what one requires. The rest is just a formality of a paper degree. So I would be very glad seeing, and in fact, I have a lot of colleagues who do not have a conservation degree, but practice within the field of heritage, which makes me very happy to see, because that means that they bring in fresh perspective, different perspective. And at the same time, we are then, as conservationists, are not cooped up in this whole idea of just merely restoring is going to be important.
Yeah, this is to be true for journalism too.
From Sania's brilliant intervention, one thing is clear in my mind, that capacities need to be built up.
Yes.
And the only way public sector capacity can be built up is through lateral entry of those who have worked in the area of conservation. There's no other way we would be able to do it. Can we move on to Mr. Joshi?
Sure.
Thanks, Sania.
There are a lot of things which Sania mentioned. Probably I will try and not repeat some of them, but wonderful. First of all, thank you for the opportunity. You touched upon a very important aspect of living with the past and not in the past, and the context of conservation. So I represent Khaki Heritage Foundation. Khaki stands for Keeping Heritage Alive and Kicking in India. There are 2 entities, one which is the for-profit entity, which is the Khaki Tours, and one which is the foundation which I run, which is the Khaki Heritage Foundation. I'll probably just try and cover 2-3 points that I wanted to make with regard to the topic today. So one is obviously for the Khaki Tours. Every year over the past 5+ years, and this is a for-profit entity, there are almost a batch of 35 to 45 ambassadors of Mumbai who are actually trained and who undergo training for at least 8 to 10 weeks about the heritage in the Mumbai city. And they are the ones who become the ambassadors of keeping the heritage alive and conducting the heritage walk. So I think this itself is a great step in terms of bringing a lay person into this particular stream who would not have the background of the heritage through proper studies, but has a great passion for history, for awareness, and for conservation. I think it's a beautiful medium of creating these ambassadors, and the whole idea is to not just do this in Mumbai, but eventually across many of the places within the country and hopefully across India. From a Heritage Foundation perspective, there are 3 broad pillars. It's awareness, archiving, and conservation. And the majority of the focus for Khaki Heritage over the next couple of years is continuing to be about creating more awareness. So two aspects. I am not an expert in this field. I am an ex-corporate working with JP Morgan over the past 2+ decades. And the fact that I have come into this field itself talks about a common person coming into and talking about heritage, archiving, how do we really promote this. So one of the things that Khaki Heritage is also going to look at is actually doing school engaged programs where we leverage college students to actually curate this program and drive this at a school level. And we think that that's where the digital conservation part will be a huge database, because as and when it keeps getting leveraged within these school engaged programs, it's definitely imperative for us to keep it updated and not just as a one-time something that happens, which even Aishwarya touched upon it as well, right? We spend so much time in developing a tool or creating something which probably becomes redundant over a period of time. So the idea is to create more and more awareness for common person as well. So this is the endeavor. Bharat Gotoskar is the founder. He would be actually the person who would have been here and talking about it a lot, because he's been doing this for 10 years. Since he's out of the country, I am representing Khaki. It's personally for me, I think it's a great learning as well for something that you have presented today. There are lot many references that I'm taking, sir, by things that you mentioned. And definitely Khaki will look forward to partner with almost all of you going forward in keeping the heritage alive. So I'll probably restrict myself at this stage here. But definitely, as I mentioned, the focus is going to be on awareness. The last thing I'll mention is CSR funding. Definitely a huge challenge when we talk about economics and funds. Less than 2% is what gets contributed towards culture and heritage and arts. Obviously, there are things that are important like education, gender, health, skill development, sustainability. This takes up almost 90 to 95% of our CSR funding, which doesn't mean that we can't keep pushing. I know there are companies and corporates, and I think once they start funding, things will definitely start moving
Yes.
towards activities and the digitalization that we want to achieve, because without the funds, it's going to be absolutely impossible. So yeah, those are the things that I thought I would like to bring to the table, making sure that I'm not repeating any of the things that already discussed.
Thanks, Mr. Doshi. And you're working in a very important area. And one could link it with what Sanaya said, that there is not enough political will. And all of us who are students of politics know that political will flows out of public will. And public will come out of awareness. So it's a very important area in which you're working.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's also at times it's driven by what kind of narrative as a
Correct.
political, where the brownie points lie for them.
one thing which
Just
I've-
one film or something, and the heritage can go for a toss. There can be public sentiment that can go right against.
No, my apologies. I interrupted. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No. So one thing which I definitely wanted to mention is, and I in the generation of 80s, 90s, and this is what I've heard a lot and I've read, that there were organic pressure groups that used to function in order to promote heritage. I think this is something that
Save the Bombay
through the
Committee.
last
It started in
two-
70s
yeah.
actually.
the last 2 decades probably hasn't seen that movement. And I think it's the young generation, millennials, and then after that is where if we start the movement, and that's why the emphasis on school engaged program, engagement in colleges, because they are the ones who are going to be a part of this movement in terms of driving this ahead. So I think the perfect group to target, because they are equipped with the digital tools, the digital know-how. They're curious, not that our generation is not, but it's just that there are limitations in terms of adapting to the new technology and tools. So I think that's the right age group to target as well.
And if I can come in here, you just said about the 1970s, and the decade of the 90s saw a complete 360-degree transformation of Mumbai from
Yeah.
being a mill-centric city to what we have become today. And we don't have one mill museum. something like that what the city was all about, the struggles of
There's a lot of fight about
all
that.
emanated from
a lot of fight. So were you on the committee at that point in time?
Yeah,
The
something
textile
is
mill
being
museum.
done in one of the.
in Parel में कुछ कर रहे हैं,
I was-
but I don't
not
know.
much.
The NTC, the NTC. one.
Yes, I was
Yeah.
part of
So,
that.
so this is what we have lost by not safeguarding our past.
Asad,
So,
you'd like to
Wow,
hear from
these
you?
are tough acts to follow, and I have so much to say, and I know how much I got. 2 minutes, 1 minute. Give me a
Please
time.
go ahead,
I also love quoting stats. I mean, one thing, India is the most populous nation in the world, 1.5 billion, and 25% of our people are under the age of 14. So we're a very young nation. These people are born with technology in their hands. They've learned to swipe before they've learned to turn a page. So digitization is the way to go. The pros, cons, all of it works itself out. Technology changes, it becomes redundant the next day. I mean, AI is here today. Who knows what avatar will be there next week? But that said, also I kind of echo the sentiment everybody talks about, the creative economy and the finances. And you all touched upon tourism, and I do a lot of work on creative tourism. And one trend we all see is spiritual tourism. You see what the Kumbh Mela did for tourism in India. See what the hospitality industry is doing to account for this spiritual tourism surge. India's rank on the World Economic Forum Travel and Tourism Index list went from 54 in 2001 to 39 in 2004. And we're going to be the top 5 business tourist destinations by 2030. All the Viksit Bharat numbers have already been said, which is quite relevant. What Dr. Jha said, talking about, sorry, I made so many notes, I have to find them. And I can't read my writing, which is another beauty. Of private properties put into these public listings. I obviously curate the Royal Opera House. And this is a private building which was privately owned, privately funded, was put on the World Monument Watch list, right? The Watson Hotel. And the owners, through their own volition, decided to restore this property and bring it back to its glory. And Abba obviously restored it and brought me in to curate it. But when people do that, do they get any rebates? Do they get any incentives? Not really. And what happens then when you restore a building, the value of the property goes up. So what goes up? Your property tax. So you're spending the money to restore the building and you're paying more taxes. And there are very few people who have the goodwill or the intent to do something like this. So that's what puts heritage that's privately owned into the peril of being questionably restored or maintained. With my work at Avid and FICCI, I'm on many of these committees where we're trying to drive creative industry policy. So FICCI, we did a couple of the G20 culture trackers year before last, and last year we did the creative industry trackers. And all the points that we're talking here, it applies to the creative industry, it applies to heritage conservation. A being education. And I always joke in the arts, financial capital is a problem, but intellectual capital is more of the problem, because where are people going to learn? Where are the institutions that are teaching? And by the way, I wanted to be an architect when I was a child. I'm a closeted architect, that's how I call myself. But everyone says they're still tired, but there's not. But that said, I think it's wonderful to have this opportunity. I have like pages. I've come prepared with a whole, so I don't ramble, but I'm not going to go down that path. And my dear friend, Mr. Kenneth, who I've done many, many collaborations with, has more words of wisdom to share. So I will shut up at this point of time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Asad. And Shri Prasad, sir.
I'll start from one way, just since the role of digitalization heritage. One thing you missed out in your very importantly, because most of it is concerning about the built heritage. One of it you mentioned in your list, the museums. Since I come from the museums, the genesis for this digital documentation, besides several other things, emanates from one public interest litigation. And there's a guy called Subhash Dutt versus Union of India. I can give you that 252-2004. Exactly what Dr. Jha mentioned. In violation of Article 49, 51F, the fundamental duties, so-called fundamental duties. And again, several of the Monument Act, 1904 Act of the Ancient Monument Preservation Act, Antiquity Act. In violation of this, the government is in violation of all these things. He went against the HRD ministry. but primarily his objective was the Ministry of Culture, which he totally forgot. Why it started is in I think it was 2003 or 4, Vishwa Bharati lost the original gold medal of the Nobel medal of Tagore. Around the same time, I think the Asiatic Society lost two gold coins, and then a couple of some paintings from Victoria, and all these things came up together. He went in PIL. It went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court finally delivered a judgment in 2015, where Ministry of Culture was one of the main partners, and there was a directive to the Secretary Culture to ensure that all digitalization of the museum objects are done. The Jatan, what you're talking about, the genesis of that comes from this. The secretary was ordered, in fact, directed to hold this meeting, to chair this meeting regularly. So, since I was a part of this, I was the director of the National Gallery of Modern Art, which was one of the institutions against whom this fellow had gone. So, all of us were actually directed, and we were constantly being monitored by the I can give you all those. I mean, it's a RTA, we all come under government, this one. So there were 14, 15 points besides security, conservation, primarily the digital documentation. Because if you had a documentation, perhaps, if something is lost, you can get it back.
Exactly.
And as recently as I think Ashutosh Mukherjee's, in the name of Ashutosh Mukherjee, there's a museum. It's called Ashutosh Museum of Art or something like that in Calcutta.
Mm-hmm.
It's also attached with the university, because Ashutosh Mukherjee himself was the Vice Chancellor of Calcutta University. They have lost I think 10th century Shiva wonderful sculpture. The irony is it's gone to Ashmolean. Ashmolean wants to repatriate the whole thing. These fellows are not ready to accept that it is missing because there's no documentation. So the primary genesis of this thing should come from this. And after about 3 years or so, things went up and the Supreme Court was monitoring and it's died down. It's died down, but not every museum. Primarily, it was targeted for 10 museums who were the part of the, those only 10 museums were asked to digitize. For example, the National Museum has got about 2 lakh objects. I don't know how many of them they have done. As NGMA director, we had about 1456, all of them done. In the process of doing this, there is one interesting observation. Why you need to highlight why it's important.
Yeah.
I came as an additional director. I'm from the science background. I was the director of the science center, and then the sir was in the bureaucracy. The best part is to give to a person, hold an additional charge, 3 months, 4 months. It continued for 6 years. Every year when I took charge, routinely, give inspection certificate. But I was very careful because when I was holding additional charge, something should not come on me. One second year, what I thought is I constituted a committee, expert committee, including Sudhir Patwardhan and such eminent people. One object was missing. And Raja's painting, which is 8, 10 crore, whatever it is. Finally, when we got through that, the irony is it is actually entered in the stock, but it's not there. It was never purchased. So something like this is there. But if you do the digitalization, that's where you can trace it, the genesis or the provenance and all those things are important. In addition to this, what is happening is whether it is museum or built heritage, several people are doing parallelly. There's no coherent approach. Can we therefore have what I call National Heritage Digitization Authority, the way you have UIDAI? If you really think of the genesis, sir, you will know better. The concept of Aadhaar, every one of us having an identity, came from, just one book of Reimagining India by Nandan Nilekani, and it's read by Montek Singh Ahluwalia. He brings it to the Prime Minister. There was everybody was very, just a very utopian idea or something like that. And no one wants to let go of their own control. Home Ministry thought that identity should be my responsibility, but Nandan Nilekani just manured through all these things. But now, from denial to discovery, what has happened? It is not just an identity; it's become a central tool for everything. Can your this digital heritage for everything, every object in single platform?
Yeah.
what we need to do is you have to, build heritage. Think of number of people who are doing this.
Yeah.
Can all of them come together under this platform? So if it is publicly available to the people,
Yeah.
You can always control it. The way you have the UID being controlled, you can always control it. More research comes about all the, not just the Taj Mahal and such other things. Every single, there's a problem of plenty when it comes to built heritage. And just go anywhere and then in your own villages, you find one or two or more, maybe more. Particularly from the place where I come from, Karnataka. In a place called Hubli, Dharwad, Gadag and all those places. Innumerable. But if you do this digital heritage, under one platform and throw it open, all over the world, scholars may only let this access be given to the scholars. More and more research comes into the picture that will directly result in terms of revenue. And this is another thing that I thought, but until you have a single authority like this, the way you have UIDIA, when you have an authority like this, and then you can always say that, 49, for example, it's actually the Constitution empowers the state to protect all these things. Since it's not happening, it has to come in after all, when it comes to conservation, with due respect to you, you're all very, you are very passionate about it. But think about the policymakers or the executives. They have to balance between the majority of the people, the end users, and this, which is a priority. First, bring them up. Yeah. Bring them up to a level where you start giving priority to this. So that's where, you will have to have a fine balance between this. But if you have an authority like this, where, it mandated and single mandate that every single thing, whoever is doing, first collect them, bring it onto one platform. Say, for example, GSW funded project of funding. Where is it? Can it not come onto this? So like that, if you, maybe you don't know, it's going to be huge, as monumental as the UID database itself. Yeah. But there is no standardization as well. And once you have a standardization, then there is an interoperability. Otherwise, each one of us, Jatan is having one standard, somebody else is having another standard.
Absolutely.
If you have one standard thing, people can access from all over the world.
True.
So these are the things which I thought will be extremely important, both in terms of trying to, suppose if you have lost something, particularly from the museums. These days, I don't know, for example, Indian Museum. In spite of the Supreme Court monitored committee, I think after 2019, there has not been a single meeting. The secretary, because it's gone out of mind. Somebody else comes in and then again files a PIL and say that it was supposed to be monitored. Has all the objects been digitally documented? No. Not only digitally documented, conservation, so many things were there. There was another very important thing in that. But the museum people themselves were very adamant. Since I came from the science background and secretary culture was again IITian, there's something known as art authentication. This was one of the points suggested by the Supreme Court. In that, what I had suggested is the way we have UID for each of us. Can I have, in addition to the digital documentation or the photographic documentation, can I use the entire electromagnetic spectrum? Can I have an X-ray of this thing? Can I have a Raman spectroscopy? So that I know for sure that this is my original. In the days of 3D printing, which can just replicate, I need to have something else. So I gave a concept note, TIFR, we wanted TIFR to come into this, or National Institute of Advanced Studies, again, which is in Bangalore. But not a single museum was interested in this. Said no technology in the world can tell this is original. It's only my eyes. Again, what we try to tell is, first you say that this is original. Whatever is there in the museum is original. Only then we digitally document it using other spectrum, not just a photography.
Yeah.
So these things are very, very important. And one more example of how it can, the revenue or in terms of tourism, how it can really help is a project known as Virtual Experiential Museum Ajanta. You've seen that? The level to which, you're talking about the digital documentation. Exceptional quality of digital documentation has been done by, in fact, we were the implementing authority. I was a part of that. It's done by IIT Bombay. It's there in National Museum now. Similarly, there is another one, both tangible and intangible in Varanasi. It's called Virtual Experiential Museum Varanasi. There is another one like this, on how it helps. You have a digital archives of Gandhi's words, several. Everybody has got, I think Gandhi is one of the person, his works have been digitized maximum. But then what we thought is, there was another concept, it was just it started from a project report which was submitted to the ministry by the organization where I worked. What we call it as a Gandhipedia. It got through. In fact, it was mentioned in the finance minister's budget speech. It's through now. It has been done by IIT Kharagpur. So like this, when you have more and more digital data available on tangible, intangible, from that people actually can bring about more and more research, go to all over the globe. Every embassy should have this thing. So this only then, when you, to the policymakers, you've got to show the positive aspect of it. Not just from the conservation point of view. How is it going to benefit in terms of tourism, in terms of the awareness of the country's tangible and intangible heritage? From that angle, only then it's going to be a 2047 developed nation. This is going to help, and all those things is very important. That's my take on this.
Thank you, sir. You have worked in this area for very long, and the ideas on the digital aspect of heritage. I think we brought out the judicial part, the administrative part, the parallel with UADI. I think many of these ideas can be picked up, and I think it will ultimately depend on what priority policymakers have in terms of heritage in their mind. And Viksit Bharat 1947, someone should be able to point out that for a developed nation, heritage continues to be very significant. So with that hope, we close this.
So in fact, there are a lot of young people around. Maybe if you can, with your permissions, everyone.
Why not? Yes.
Any questions or anything? Question especially.
So myself, Chaitanya, I am a student, recently passed out. I do not have any background with regards to whether conservation or with regards to any authority or whatever judicial or such administrative knowledge. However, it just pondered to me because I live around the city and come to the city of Mumbai very frequently, so past so many years. I was thinking about this question as to whether the definition of heritage can be broadened to such levels that people themselves become part or become the living heritage. Can it happen? Or like how you said, intellectual capital, right? So it is related to the minds of the people and how they think and what they perceive. So it relates to values as well. So that's why what I want to ask is whether people themselves can become a living heritage, and should it be come under the conservation categories?
No, so in many ways, heritage does tell you that, right? So, like for example, from an archaeological site, you can tell how a group of people lived, what they ate, what age they died, what were the causes of death, what was the society like at that point in time. So in many ways, with heritage, you are archiving a way of life. In many ways, heritage also passes down various ways of life where it gets amalgamated and layered to form a new way of life. That's why we call it the living heritage, right? So in the house where your ancestors lived, your grandparents lived, your parents lived, you live, all of you belong to a different age, right, period, and all of you have used the house, and that house has adapted to all that change. That is the beauty of heritage. That's why we are saying that it is important, and those are the values we associate it with. So of course, and like I said, but that value is of the present. It's not going to be of the past, and it's not going to be of the future. So that value is not because your parents wanted it or your children want it. It's because you want it. That becomes very important, I guess. I don't know if that answers your question.
I can just add a bit. There's Newton used one very beautiful phrase when asked, everybody has seen something falling down. Why the hell did you understand that there's something, gravity, which is pulling it down? He said, by standing on the shoulders of the giants, I could see it further. So I'm taking from what she said, people. say for example Indus Valley. Very soon in the Chhatrapati Museum where I am presently working, there's going to be an exhibition called as Ancient World Gallery. So if Indus, for example, you have the standard practices. I was just using the term, there is no standardization in terms of digitalization. But during that time, the Sindhu Saraswati period, you had some kind of a standardization. For example, bricks or the weights and measures. So that keeps continuing. What she talked about, there is a continuity of the people, taking forward the heritage, but building onto the value of those people, understanding that and then building, adding on to it. So in that sense, the people are also part of the heritage that so we are supposed to preserve or conserve.
That's true. Actually, there's a very famous urban designer by the name Edmund Bacon, and he talks about the principle of the second man. In the sense, the one who comes next is going to decide whether what's going to be preserved or the one that came before them. So we are, in many ways, we all represent the second man. It's up to us to decide what was before us and how we decide to continue it kind of further. I mean, generically, I meant human as man in that sense.
I think like nothing. It was
Final
wonderful.
words.
It was
Thank
absolutely
you.
wonderful. Very good
It
presentation.
was too short though.
And
Too much more to say.
And in fact, we overshot the
Yeah,
time. So
yeah,
thank you all
yeah.
for bearing with us. And I take the blame entirely for that. It really went out of hand.
How do we recreate intangible aspects of heritage, such as specific customs of a local community? And do we see a possibility of a resurrection of some of these customs as we go on?
Can I take a stab at this?
Yeah, why not?
So a previous shorter piece that I'd written talked about this one example coming from Surat, where there is a cemetery which was digitally twinned, and they created essentially a simulation of all these intangible aspects that are otherwise very time consuming and tough to document and incorporate. But the way it goes is that you can incorporate and program these into AR and VR simulations as, be it like food that is available around the area. If you move around, you will see a particular vendor sitting with type of food, and you click on that vendor, you can see what the categories of that food are. Or
Possibly how you can make or replicate the food.
exactly. And or what the people around it are wearing, stuff like that. And there are several recreations of this kind that try to incorporate intangible aspects as well. Of course, capturing them and articulating them completely is near impossible, but efforts have been made in the regard. So.
There's one, for example, you're talking about intangible things, but so if you really, music, for example, it's as diverse as any of these things, go from one place to other place. There's one institution, in fact, Dr. Vikram Sampath has got a foundation. I've forgotten the name now. He has used the Indian music and for all types of music, intangible, across the country. He has tried to document that digitally.
Yeah.
So this is something which perhaps, some things must have already died down.
I think
This,
there's a music museum
There's
in
a museum in
Bangalore.
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 That's a museum,
Yeah.
but he's actually documented every single village. You will have some or the other things which are maybe majority of them are
Great.
died down.
If they all came
Yeah.
together, as you
Bangalore-
said, we'd have a repository.
Exactly.
Everyone's
All of
doing it
them will become,
separately.
the monumental thing.
But the
Yeah.
Bangalore Museum on
Fantastic.
music
The music
is
is
an experience.
superb. It's
there.
brilliant.
Brilliantly.
Yeah.
So we'll call it a day. Thank you everyone for participating. Thank you all the students who have come from out, our interns. And thank you all the participants. It was absolutely wonderful and a very, very, very enriching discussion. So we look forward to the next time when we do something similar and we'll invite you again. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.